I'm on the heels of a very uneventful weekend. Morgan, quite the opposite with you. You had an exciting weekend that Pat George and I have been following.
Yeah, I had a big weekend up in Washington, D.C. I got to go to the Federalist Society National Lawyers Convention, which runs Thursday through Saturday every year in mid-November, and got to see quite a bit. I wasn't there for the entire convention, but I got to see quite a bit while I was there. And I have to tell you, it really made my trip when I was able to meet, shake hands with, and get a photograph with Attorney General William Barr, who I have a great amount of respect for. And as President Trump would say, he's a greatly respected man, which he is. And he gave a fascinating lecture, and it's called the Barbara Olson Memorial Lecture, which we all remember the story of Barbara Olson was on one of the planes. I don't remember which one of the planes it was, but one of the planes in the 9/11 terrorist attack, and lost her life in that attack. And so back at that time, the Federalist Society began a memorial lecture series for her. And Ted Olson usually attends. Ted Olson, of course, is an interesting guy because he's kind of turned liberal on us. I don't know if you're aware of all those little details. That's kind of Washington insider stuff that if you live in Washington, D.C., you know all those little nuances and details. But those of us out here in real America, as we'll call it, outside the Beltway, generally don't know all the little nuances and goings-on with the different key players in Washington.
Did you see anybody else from the Tampa Bay area there?
Oh, sure. There were a lot of people from Tampa there. In fact, I think we had our largest contingent from Tampa that we've ever had there. We had a very large contingent from the state of Florida. And we usually have a good showing from the entire state of Florida, but we had a great group from Tampa, including the general counsel for Ashley Moody was there. Now, he's obviously moved up to Tallahassee, but a good man, an old friend of mine, and so it was enjoyable to get to spend a little bit of time with him because I don't get to see so much of him anymore since he's moved to Tallahassee. He's quite busy and everything that he's working on. But we had a good group from our local chapter here in Tampa, maybe 8 or 10 folks, maybe even a little more than that, went up from the Tampa Bay area. So, and these are all people that I'm pretty closely familiar with since I was the president of the local chapter of the Federalist Society for a number of years and been involved since I was in law school. So now we're going back a couple of decades.
Any impeachment talk?
Well,
what was the buzz as far as since William Barr was there? I mean,
he was there, and I'll tell you, you've got to go out and listen to his speech. And this is I was going to see if we could do a segment a little bit later in the show, but we've got so many topics to try to cover today. Maybe we just go ahead and cover it now. And kind of jump to the front with the William Barr speech, but you should go out there if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the thought process of the Attorney General. That entire speech, you can find it online. You can find it probably on the Federalist Society website, which is fedsoc, FEDSOC.org. And you can also find it other places. The Conservative Treehouse, one of our favorite websites for commentary, has the entire transcript of it along with a link to the video of the speech. Now, it's a rather lengthy speech. I'd say maybe 45 minutes to an hour. I wasn't timing it. Maybe it's even a little longer than that, but it's a fascinating speech all about the unitary executive as a theory and as an originalist theory. And what you mean when you say something like originalism or originalist is trying to understand the structure of the government by taking the words as they were used on the papers at the time and what was the ordinary meaning of those words to the average person at the time. So you're basically trying to understand what did they mean at the time that they wrote it and not what would we think it to mean today as we read it. And this is a very useful way to interpret all laws because you are trying – I mean, what does a law mean, right? Does it mean – go ahead.
I was going to say they don't have perspective. Those who wrote it back then don't have perspective as to what the future will hold. So you can only hold it at the value of what did they mean at that point in time.
Well, and I guess what you're trying to understand is what does the law mean? When laws are written, when laws are passed, or even when political theories are created, when they're discussed, what did they mean by them? Now, We might use words differently today, as we often do, than they used them in the past. But how do you can't really get to the core, the starting point for understanding, unless you can understand what they meant by it. And it's the true nature is, what did it mean to the average person in normal speech at the time?
There was a picture of you with Bill Barr, but there was something you were holding in your hand also. What was that? You seemed pretty proud you had that in your hand.
Well, I did. In a good topic to raise at this time, that we're talking about the idea of originalism. I was permitted, and this was something great that the Federalist Society did, and the gentleman who actually owned these 2 volumes was able to do. That's not the picture. It's a different picture that he's talking about. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just a picture of me with William Barr at a reception. And that was after his speech on the Unitary Executive. But the Federalist Society had an ongoing exhibition of the first edition copies of the Federalist Papers. Now, the Federalist Papers are famously a series of short essays that were written by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, and were published in the papers, particularly the New York papers, and it was an effort to get people to support and approve the new federal Constitution. And remember, this was a tumultuous time. It wasn't a clear path that we were always going to have a Constitution. Prior to the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation, and there were groups who believed that even that was too much, or that we should stick with something like that, which was a less connected confederation of independent sovereigns, or should we move into this more what they call federalist position, where, yes, the states are independent, but they're connected with a slightly stronger central government that has a larger role to play. Rather than just being a council of the state governments, this is actually a separate government that has its own spheres, own areas that it controls within the body of laws and controls the nation. And there's a lot of, we could speak for hours about this particular debate, but you had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So the Federalist Papers were designed to try and win over the hearts and minds of the people to the idea of this new Constitution that was being proposed and voted on at the time. So they were originally printed in the papers in 1787, but also very soon thereafter they were bound into a couple of volumes of books, 2 volumes actually, and sold as books. And again, this was sort of a way to have the collected Federalist Papers all in one place if you were so interested. And at the time, many people were interested in having that. So I was able, thanks to the Federalist Society's work and thanks to the generous gentleman who I got to speak with for a few minutes who actually owned these copies of the Federalist Papers, to hold and also hear from some learned professors about some first edition copies of the 2 volumes of the Federalist Papers in book form. So you can see a picture of me holding it very proudly. I thought that was just, I'm a big fan of history, a student of history, and I was thrilled to be able to hold something that was actually printed up in 1787. Actually, those volumes were printed in 1788 because, again, originally they ran these in the paper, but they then very quickly thereafter printed them into book form.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.